What if the history of the Bronze and Iron Ages was a lie? We're taught that metalworking has always required massive furnaces, coal-burning heat, and weeks of grueling labor. But scattered across the globe are artifacts that simply shouldn't exist. Iron that never rusts. Steel with the molecular structure of modern nanotechnology. Look at the ornate gates of the old world. They look less like they were hammered into shape and more like they were poured as easily as water. What if an ancient civilization didn't melt metal? What if they softened it using frequency and chemistry we've been forced to forget? Today, we dive into the lost liquid forge of Tartaria, the technology they erased to keep us dependent on the furnace. In the modern world, we believe that shaping iron requires a brutal application of force. To melt it, you need to reach temperatures exceeding 1500 degrees Celsius. This is the foundation of our industrial era, a world built on heat, coal, and massive energy consumption. But what if there was another way? Imagine a process where metal is manipulated not by fire, but by frequency and chemical catalysts. A world where steel could be softened to the consistency of clay, molded by hand, and then hardened back into an unbreakable state. This is the concept of the liquid forge. It is a technology that appears repeatedly in the margins of our history books, often attributed to alchemical secrets or lost arts. The Tartarian hypothesis suggests that a global, technologically advanced civilization once mastered this soft metal science. They used it to build the impossible cathedrals and iron-laced cities of the 18th and 19th centuries. But between 1850 and 1920, something changed. A great reset occurred. Our history was rewritten to make us believe that progress only comes through the chimney of a factory. Was the Industrial Revolution an invention, or was it a calculated downgrade? Did we trade a clean, elegant science for the dirty, expensive metallurgy of today? The official history of the modern world is anchored in a single revolutionary moment, the birth of the Bessemer process. In 1856, an English inventor named Henry Bessemer patented a method to mass-produce high-quality steel. Alongside Robert Mouchet, he is credited with dragging humanity out of the age of brittle pig iron and into the era of the skyscraper. This story is neat, linear, and fits perfectly into our school textbooks. But when you look at the physical evidence left behind, the timeline begins to crumble under its own weight. Consider the sheer scale of the 19th century. Between 1850 and 1915, the world saw an explosion of infrastructure that defies logical explanation. During the Great Exhibitions, like London in 1851 or Chicago in 1893, temporary cities were erected in mere months. They featured massive iron domes, intricate steel truss bridges, and thousands of miles of perfectly laid railway tracks. According to the official story, this was all achieved with horse-drawn carriages, steam-powered hammers, and primitive coal furnaces. But there is a massive red flag in the craftsmanship itself. It's what researchers call the complexity gap. If you walk through any historic district in Europe or the older cities of the American East Coast, look closely at the ironwork from the mid-1800s. You will see ornate fences, street lamps, and structural beams that are incredibly complex. They feature delicate floral patterns, perfect geometric symmetry, and seamless joints. Modern blacksmiths will tell you that to create these shapes with traditional heat and hammer methods would take a lifetime for a single gate. Yet these items were supposedly mass-produced by the thousands in a time when electricity was still a novelty. Even more suspicious is the lack of weld marks. In modern metallurgy, we join pieces of metal together by melting the edges, a process that leaves a visible seam or a bead. The ironwork of the Old World often appears as if it were a single, continuous piece of metal. It looks like it was poured into a mold as if the iron were as fluid as water, Yet the detail is too fine for traditional sand casting techniques. Sand casting is a messy, grainy process. It cannot produce the razor-sharp edges and microscopic detail seen on the pillars of the 1893 World's Fair. To achieve that level of precision, the metal would have to be in a superplastic state, flowing into every tiny crevice of a mold without the cooling and shrinking issues that plague molten iron. This leads us to a chilling realization. If Henry Bessemer only invented modern steel in 1856, how do we explain the high-performance artifacts that appeared decades, or even centuries, earlier? How did they build the massive, iron-ribbed glass palaces of the mid-19th century using technology that shouldn't have existed yet? The official story says it was just brute force and cheap labor. But the evidence suggests a different branch of science, a science that outperforms our best modern laboratories. If the liquid forge theory sounds like science fiction, you haven't looked closely at the metallurgical anomalies that mainstream history tries to ignore. The first piece of evidence sits in the high-tech laboratories of the 21st century, where scientists are finally rediscovering what our ancestors already knew. Consider the Damascus steel mystery. For centuries, these blades were legendary for their strength, their flexibility, and their watered patterns that looked like flowing silk. In 2006, a study published in the journal Nature sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Researchers using high-resolution electron microscopy found something impossible. Inside 17th-century Damascus blades were carbon nanotubes and nanowires. This isn't just good blacksmithing, this is nanotechnology, the precise molecular manipulation of matter. According to our textbooks, nanotechnology was pioneered in the late 20th century. Yet, here it is, woven into the steel of the 1600s. How did ancient smiths achieve this? They didn't have computers or clean rooms. But they did have a process that allowed the metal to reach a superplastic state, where carbon atoms could align into perfect microscopic tubes. If they had this capability in 900 AD, why did we lose it for nearly 300 years? Why did the recipe for Damascus steel suddenly vanish just as the modern industrial era began? The second piece of evidence is even more visible. It stands in the courtyard of the Kup complex in India, the Iron Pillar of Delhi. This pillar is 23 feet tall, weighs over 6 tons, and is made of 98% pure wrought iron. It has stood in the open air for over 1,600 years. And yet, it has not rusted. Think about that. A 6-ton iron structure from the 4th century that outperforms modern galvanized steel. The official explanation is that a passive film of protective rust formed on the surface due to high phosphorus content. But this ignores the most startling feature, the surface itself. When you examine the pillar, you don't see the rough, uneven texture of a hammer-beaten object. It looks extruded. It looks as if it were squeezed through a die or poured into a mold with the consistency of toothpaste. If we use the standard math of metallurgy, the energy required to melt 6 tons of iron is staggering. Using the latent heat of fusion formula, Q$MIGC.L_F$. To melt this much iron, you would need over 1.6 million kilojoules of energy. In the 4th century, a wood fire furnace simply could not maintain that level of concentrated heat for a pour of this size. The math doesn't add up for a heat-based forge. But it works perfectly if you use a chemical softening forge. This brings us to the work of Dr. Joseph Davidovits, a pioneer in the study of geopolymers. Davidovits proved that many ancient stones, including the blocks of the Great Pyramid and Roman concrete, were not carved. They were chemically cast. They used a liquid stone technology that allowed them to pour massive blocks that hardened into a molecular bond stronger than natural rock. The liquid forge theory simply applies this same logic to metal. If they could turn limestone into a liquid slurry, why wouldn't they do the same with iron or gold? There are clues hidden in the alchemical manuscripts of the 17th century. In the Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, printed in 1652, there are recipes that describe fixing mercury and making iron as soft as wax. Mainstream historians call these metaphors for spiritual enlightenment. But what if they were literal technical manuals? What if alchemy was simply the chemistry of the liquid forge, the science of breaking the molecular bond of metal without the need for a fine 100-degree furnace? These artifacts aren't just anomalies, they are the breadcrumbs of a lost technological inheritance. They prove that a high-precision, low-heat metallurgy once existed across the globe. But as the 1800s approached, this decentralized, elegant science began to disappear. It was replaced by the clunky, energy-hungry machines of the Industrial Revolution. The question is, was this a natural evolution of technology, or was it the first step in a great reset designed to control how we build our world? To find the answer, we have to look at the heart of the Tartarian conspiracy. We have to look at the liquid forge itself. If this technology existed, how was it actually powered? This is where we move from the artifacts into the heart of the Tartarian conspiracy. The Tartarian theory doesn't just suggest a lost country, it suggests a lost physics. A physics that didn't rely on burning fossil fuels, but on the very medium we inhabit, the ether. Proponents of this theory point to what they call antikythera. Look at the skylines of the old world before the 20th century. You see massive cathedral spires, copper-clad domes, and strange ornate metal finials reaching toward the clouds. Official history calls these religious ornaments or architectural flourishes. But look at their construction. These are often made of highly conductive materials like copper, brass, and iron. They are positioned at the highest points of buildings, often connected to massive internal metal frameworks. What if these weren't decorations? What if they were atmospheric energy collectors, antennas designed to pull electricity directly from the ionosphere? This brings us to the liquid forge mechanism. In modern science, we know that specific frequencies can affect the molecular bonds of matter. This is called sonoluminescence, or acoustic levitation. The theory suggests that the Tartarians used resonant frequencies, amplified through these architectural antennas, to unlock the lattice structure of metals. By applying a specific vibration, they could drop the melting point of iron from 1500 degrees to room temperature. The metal would become superplastic, as soft as clay or as fluid as water, without ever becoming hot to the touch. This is what researchers mean by cold forging. It's a process that preserves the temper and the molecular integrity of the metal, which explains why the iron pillar of Delhi doesn't rust. It wasn't burned in a furnace, it was molded in a resonant state. Now let's look at the most controversial piece of this puzzle: red mercury. In the darker corners of the internet and in suppressed Soviet-era documents, red mercury is described as a philosopher's stone for the modern age. It is allegedly a potent catalyst, a substance that can trigger massive energy releases or stabilize metallurgical transitions. Some researchers believe red mercury was the chemical softener used in the Tartarian liquid forge. A single drop in a vat of iron could break the metallic bonds, allowing it to be poured into the most intricate molds imaginable. This explains the impossible speed of the World's Fairs. Take the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, also known as the White City. It was a sprawling metropolis of massive, ornate palaces built in a little over a year. The official story says these buildings were made of staff, a mixture of plaster of Paris and hemp fiber. They tell us it was all temporary and fake. But photographs from the era tell a different story. You see massive iron machinery, giant statues with no seams, and structural beams that survived the Great Fires that conveniently destroyed these fairs shortly after they closed. If you look at the Palace of Fine Arts, which still stands today as the Museum of Science and Industry, the detail in the stone and metal is too perfect for a temporary job. It looks like it was poured into place. If the Tartarians had the liquid forge, they could print an entire city in months. They didn't need thousands of stonemasons, they needed molds and the right frequency. So, why did it disappear? Why was this elegant, clean technology erased from our history books? The answer lies in the Great Reset of the mid-19th century. Between 1850 and 1920, the world underwent a violent transition. This was the era of the robber barons, men like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan. These men built their empires on the control of resources. The problem with the liquid forge is that it was decentralized. If you can soften metal with a chemical catalyst or an atmospheric antenna, you don't need a coal mine. You don't need a massive power grid. You don't need to pay for energy. The liquid forge was a threat to the very idea of scarcity. To establish the modern industrial system, the old world had to be cleared away. The temporary World's Fairs were used to showcase the old technology one last time before it was demolished or burned. They replaced the atmospheric antennas with ornamental crosses and flagpoles. They replaced the liquid forge with the Bessemer furnace. They took a technology that was silent, clean, and accessible to everyone, and replaced it with a technology that was loud, dirty, and required a massive corporate infrastructure to maintain. This is why history was rewritten. They had to make us believe that the old world was primitive, that they were just guys with hammers, so we wouldn't realize what we had lost. Think about the orphan trains of the late 1800s. Millions of children relocated, their family histories severed. This was the generation that was taught the new history. They were told that the massive, ornate buildings they saw were built by their grandfathers with simple tools, even though those grandfathers had no record of such skills. The liquid forge was reclassified as alchemical myth. Red mercury was labeled a hoax. And the science of frequency-based metallurgy was buried in the classified archives of the new military-industrial complex. But as we are seeing today, you can't suppress the laws of physics forever. The truth about metal soft as water is starting to leak back into the light. And what we are finding in modern laboratories might just be the rediscovery of a technology that was stolen from us over a century ago. If this liquid forge was truly a lost science, we should see modern science accidentally bumping into its ghost. And that is exactly what is happening in the world's most advanced laboratories right now. For decades, the idea of softening metal without extreme heat was laughed at by mainstream academia. But in the last few years, the laughter has stopped. Consider the groundbreaking work being done at North Carolina State University. Researchers there have been experimenting with gallium-based liquid metals. They've discovered that by applying a tiny electrical charge, less than 1 volt, they can change the surface tension of the metal. They can make it expand, contract, and move as if it were a living organism. This is room temperature metal manipulation. It's not a furnace, it's an electrical trigger. When you see these liquid metals morphing and holding complex shapes at room temperature, you aren't looking at the future. You are looking at a recovery of the Tartarian past. But it goes even deeper. In 2016, researchers at Northeastern University announced the development of something they called mesoglue. This is a metallic glue that allows you to weld metal to metal at room temperature. No torches, no sparks, no dangerous heat. The glue creates a molecular bond that is just as strong as a traditional weld. The scientists admitted that this could revolutionize manufacturing by removing the need for massive, energy-hungry smelting plants. If we can do this with a glue in 2016, why couldn't a global civilization with atmospheric energy collectors do it in 1820? The official history says these things are new discoveries, but look at the patterns. Look at the suspicious gaps in the 19th century archives. In the mid-1800s, there was a flurry of patents for cold forming and chemical milling. And then, suddenly, many of these technologies were bought up by the emerging steel giants and they simply vanished. This is the hallmark of suppression. When a technology threatens a monopoly, it doesn't get outcompeted. It gets erased. Think about the benefit of the heat-based forge for the robber barons. If you want to control a population, you have to control their ability to build. If everyone can soften iron in their backyard using a chemical catalyst and an antenna, the power elite lose their leverage. But if you force the world to use coal, oil, and massive, centralized furnaces, you can tax every single step of the process. You can control the rails, the mines, and the factories. The transition from the liquid forge to the Bessemer process wasn't an upgrade in efficiency. It was an upgrade in control. We see the evidence of this suppression in the way red mercury is treated. In mainstream media, red mercury is portrayed as a fictional MacGuffin from spy movies. Yet there are countless reports of it being recovered in black market busts involving former Soviet scientists. They describe it as a ball milling catalyst that can trigger cold fusion or cold metallurgy. Is it a coincidence that the very substance rumored to power the Tartarian forge is the one substance the modern world has labeled too dangerous to exist? We are being told that we are at the pinnacle of human achievement. But every time a modern lab discovers a way to mold metal without heat, they are just rediscovering a page from the Tartarian manual. The question isn't whether metal soft as water is possible. The question is, why are they so afraid of us having it? Why does a lost forge from the 19th century matter to you today? Because the suppression of the liquid forge wasn't just about steel, it was about the control of human potential. Look at your surroundings. Look at the modern buildings in your city. They are made of glass, cheap concrete, and steel beams that are designed to rust and fail within 50 to 100 years. Compare that to the old-world structures that have survived for centuries. The wrought iron fences of the 1800s are still standing, while the modern steel bridges from the 1970s are crumbling into the rivers. We have been sold a version of technology that is intentionally inefficient. We live in a burn-and-break society, a world where every act of creation requires the destruction of fuel. If we had access to the liquid forge today, the cost of construction would practically vanish. Imagine high-speed rail networks, earthquake-proof housing, and massive infrastructure being poured into existence at room temperature. We wouldn't need a massive, centralized energy grid that charges us for every kilowatt. We wouldn't be dependent on a handful of global corporations to provide the heat for our civilization. This is why the Great Reset happened. They had to transition us from a society of harmonize and mold, which used resonance and chemistry, to a society of combustion and control. Every time you pay a utility bill or look at the skyrocketing cost of a new home, you are paying the price for the erasure of Tartarian technology. The liquid forge represents a decentralized future. It represents a world where high technology is as accessible as the air we breathe. But as the official narrative begins to crack, people are starting to notice the antiquitech hidden in plain sight. They are looking at the domes and the spires not as decorations, but as a massive, abandoned power plant. We are living in the ruins of a superior civilization, using their poured iron foundations to support our welded tin shacks. But the rediscovery of gallium alloys and metallic glues in our modern labs proves that the science is still there. It's waiting for us to stop believing the lie that progress is a straight line. What if the Industrial Revolution was actually the dark ages of metallurgy? And what if we are finally waking up to the light? The Damascus steel blades, the stainless iron pillar of Delhi, and the impossible speed of the 19th century World's Fairs all point to a single hidden truth. Metal was once as soft as water. The Tartarian Liquid Forge wasn't magic, and it wasn't a myth. It was a superior understanding of the natural world, a science of resonance, chemistry, and molecular harmony. They didn't just erase a country from the map. They erased a way of life that didn't require permission from a power company to build. Today, we are told that our burning furnaces are the pinnacle of progress. But the old world remains, standing in silent defiance of the history books. Next time you walk through your city, look at the ironwork of the oldest buildings. Look for the seams. Look for the hammer marks. When you don't find them, ask yourself, who really built this? And why were we told they were primitive? If you want to see more evidence of the technology they tried to bury, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The Great Reset is only a secret as long as we refuse to look. What do you think? Was the Liquid Forge a real technology or just an alchemical dream? Let us know in the comments below.